So today's theme is topography of the skull. First of all, we shall discuss the border between the roof and the base of the skull. Here it is, the skull, and the border may be drawn like this. How explain this line? For explanation, we shall list all the points which were connected by this line. They are, first of all, protuberantia accipitalis externa. Protuberantia accipitalis externa. Then, linea nuchae superior. Linea nuchae superior. Then the base of processus mastoidus, base of mastoid process. Then superior edge of porus acousticus externus. Superior edge of porus acousticus externus. Then the base of processus zygamaticus. The base of processus zygamaticus. Then crista infratemporalis alle majoris ossis sphenoidalis. Crista infratemporalis alle majoris ossis sphenoidalis. Then processus zygamaticus ossis frontalis. Processus zygamaticus ossis frontalis. Then margo supraorbitalis ossis frontalis. Margo supraorbitalis ossis frontalis. And then, at last, sutura nasofrontalis. Sutura nasofrontalis. So, we finished to list all the points, and when we connect each of these points, we shall have the line which I'd like again to demonstrate to you. So, in this line, you can find each of these points, and your task is to demonstrate it also in specimen. Next question. Outer base of the skull. Outer base of the skull. Here it is. Picture which demonstrates outer base of the skull. For us, very important to understand how we can divide it into departments. There are 3 departments: anterior department, which has as a border posterior margin of the horizontal plate of palatine bone. Middle department and posterior department. The line which divides posterior department and middle department is line through anterior margin of foramen magnum. Anterior margin of foramen magnum. So, in our control lesson, you should demonstrate each detail, each structures in all three departments of outer base of the skull, and to explain where are the borders between these departments. Then, next question is inner base of the skull. Inner base of the skull. Inner base of the skull we also can divide into three parts, but they named as fossa. Fossa cranii anterior. Here it is. I use this blue line to divide fossa cranii anterior from the next part, from fossa cranii media. And what is the border? The border is posterior margin of small wings of sphenoid bone and sulcus chiasmatis. You can find here all these structures: posterior margin of small wings and sulcus chiasmatis, corpus sphenoidalis. And then another border which divide fossa cranii posterior and fossa cranii media. Again, blue line. And this blue line pass through upper edge of pyramid of the temporal bone and sulcus sinus transversus of occipital bone. So, upper edge of pyramid and sulcus transversus of occipital bone. So, when we know that there are three fossa of inner base of the skull, we need to demonstrate each structure, each detail on it, and to explain what is it using Latin terms. Next question. Openings of the orbit. We know that orbit is a pyramid with four walls, and there are several openings of it which connects pyramid, orbit, with another cavities of the skull. What they are? First of all, additus ad orbite. Additus ad orbite. We use these two red lines around the orbit to demonstrate this hole, how we can enter to the orbit, to the eye socket. So first, most large foramen is additus ad orbite. And now, number 2, canalis opticus. Canalis opticus. Through it, nervus opticus passes from middle fossa to eye socket. Then number 3, fissura orbitalis superior. Fissura orbitalis superior. We remember that this fissure is part of sphenoid bone, that it's between large wing and small wing of sphenoid bone. So it divides these two wings of sphenoid bone. Then number 4, fissura orbitalis inferior. Fissura orbitalis inferior. Number 4. Then number 5, foramen supraorbitale. Foramen supraorbitale. We also know that sometimes we have no foramen, but only we have incisura supraorbitale. But nevertheless, either incisura, either foramen, we can find on each orbit. Number 6, foramen infraorbitale. Number 6, foramen infraorbitale. Number 7, canalis nasolacrimalis. Canalis nasolacrimalis. Canalis nasolacrimalis. It connects eye socket with nasal cavity, and that's why we usually hear if a man is weeping, because the tears pass through this canal into nasal cavity, and we hear this kind of sounds. Number 8, foramen etmoidale anterior. Foramen etmoidale anterior. And number 9, foramen etmoidale posterior. Both these foramina are located in medial wall of the orbit. Foramen etmoidale anterior and posterior, and they lead to the cellula etmoidalis, and after these into nasal cavity. And last, number 10, foramen zygomatico orbitale. Sure, it's impossible to demonstrate it from front view. That's why we use this arrow to show that to find this foramen zygomatic orbitale, we need to turn specimen and look at the lateral or inferior wall of the eye socket. So we know now that there are 10 foramina. You should to list it by heart in Latin language and demonstrate in our specimen. It's very important. Next question. Walls of the orbit. We again repeat that orbit has a shape of pyramid. Pyramid with 4 walls and 4 edges. And we need to know each of it. So, superior wall. Now the patient is before us. We look at his face from anterior view and sure the superior wall is this wall. Here, what are the bones which forms this superior wall? They are 2. Os frontale and ale minoris ossis sphenoidalis. Os frontale and ale minoris ossis sphenoidalis. Or we should say in singular ala minor ossis sphenoidalis, because in one orbit only one wing of sphenoid bone. So 2 bones forms superior wall. Then inferior wall. This one. Inferior wall. I use this red line to make a border between inferior wall, medial and lateral. So we can find that there are 3 bones which form inferior wall. First of all, os zygomaticum, then corpus maxillae here of green color, and processus orbitalis ossis palatini. Processus orbitalis ossis palatini is quite small, triangular shape in the apex of pyramid, apex of orbit. Here, this small, maybe pink color, maybe some kind of brown color. This depends from your screen. So 3 bones form the inferior wall. Now the medial wall. Can you say me, is it right orbit or left? Sure, right. That's why it's medial wall. Here it's medial wall. So medial wall forms 4 bones. First of all, processus frontalis maxilla, this of green color, processus frontalis maxilla, here it is, of green color. Then os lacrimale, number 2, of this dark pink color, Here it is. Then os etmoidalia. Here it is. And number 4, which is written, but we can't see it in this position of orbit. Corpus ossis sphenoidalia. Corpus ossis sphenoidalia. How we can demonstrate it in specimen? How we can find it? For this purpose, for demonstration of corpus ossis sphenoidalis, we need to put any pointer inside of the canalis opticus, and medially of it we shall find a small 4 or 5 millimeters of length part of corpus ossis sphenoidalis. So it will be here, but in this picture it isn't seen. And last, 4th wall is lateral wall. This is lateral wall. How much bones form this lateral wall? Only 2. First of all, os zygomaticum of light pink color, os zygomaticum, and second, ala major ossis sphenoidalis. Ala major ossis sphenoidalis of yellow color. So now we know all the bones which form the walls of the orbit. Sure, it's easy when you see this picture and when all the bones are colorized, but it's more difficult in natural bony specimen when bones are not colorized, but we ought to distinguish each bone and demonstrate to what wall it concerns. Next question, the walls of nasal cavity. Nasal cavity has also several walls. But before to find all this wall of nasal cavity, may I ask you how much walls we have in this room, in this hall? 6. Also floor and roof. So 4 walls, roof and floor. So usually it should be 6 walls if the cavity have a right form, right shape. But nevertheless, sometimes could be different situation. What is this specimen? It's specimen of head after conservation in formaldehyde. And what kind of cutting we use here? Frontal plane. You are right. Frontal plane through nasal cavity, here it is. Through oral cavity, here it is. It's tongue, cutted tongue. And through sphenoid bone, it's sinus sphenoidalis. And what is this? It's fossa cranii media, where the brain is placed. So brain was removed, and we can see this specimen. So number one, what is it? Number one. Number one is upper wall of nasal cavity. And we can say that upper wall separates nasal cavity from the anterior cranial fossa. From the anterior cranial fossa. Upper wall separates nasal cavity from the anterior cranial fossa. And now, number two. What is it, number two? It's lower wall. And we can say that it's the same as term hard palate, because lower wall of nasal cavity separates it from the oral cavity. So inferior or lower wall divides nasal cavity from the oral cavity. And now, number three. What is it, number three? It's lateral wall, sure. Lateral wall separates nasal cavity from the orbit, but orbit here isn't seen, and from the maxillary sinus. And the maxillary sinus, we can see here, it's designated as letter G. It's interesting, you can say that here maxillary sinus is quite small. It's smaller than in bony specimen. Why? Because here there is a mucous sheet which covers from inside the maxillary sinus. So why we need to have maxillary sinus and other sinuses of the skull? For two reasons. One reason is resonance. For our sound when we speak was allowed, for it was here from distance. If you remember the shape of the violin, of the guitar, we can remember that inside of it there is a cavity, and due to this cavity the sound is more loud. So when we have catch a cold, so this mucous sheet will be injured from edema. It become more large, more thick, and we usually hear that this person has pronunciation as a Frenchman, because there is no possibility to resonance of sound. And now we understand that maxillary sinus connects and lies laterally according to lateral wall of the nasal cavity. So three walls. Now fourth wall. Number four, medial wall. We can say that medial wall is the same as term septum of the nasal cavity. Septum of the nasal cavity. Septum of the nasal cavity divides nasal cavity in two symmetrical parts, right and left. So it's the medial wall. And then there are also two another walls, but we can't demonstrate it on this picture. Why? Because they are anteriorly and posteriorly to this plane, so we need to use another picture. So here it is. Part of bony nasal cavity, and I use this red line to demonstrate you back wall. We can say that back wall is only partial. We can find it only in superior part of nasal cavity, and we can say that it separates nasal cavity from the sphenoidal sinus, sinus sphenoidalis. Here it is, sinus sphenoidalis, and this pointer demonstrates how we can enter the sinus from nasal cavity. So, posterior wall or back wall is formed by corpus ossis sphenoidalis. It's corpus ossis sphenoidalis. But can you answer me what is the name, the term of this space through which the air passes through nasal cavity to the nasopharyngeal cavity? What is name of this space? What is it? Hoan. We know that there are two hoans. Usually we can see it from back, but now we can see it in the cutting plane. So, inferior part of posterior wall, of back wall, is formed by corpus ossis sphenoidalis and hoan, but hoan is space, not bony wall. And another 6 is anterior wall. It's also partial. We can find it only in the upper part of nasal cavity. We can say that it's the back of the nose, nasal bone. So nasal bone is the anterior wall of the nasal cavity. So 6 walls. From 6 walls, 2 anterior and posterior are partial. They not close the nasal cavity completely, but have a space through which air can enter to nasal cavity and exit from nasal cavity to nasopharyngeal cavity. And I'd like to say several words that anatomy is very interesting subject, because we can find a lot of interesting data according the connections between structure and function. It may be strange, but nevertheless, from the shape and from the from the measurement of this bone depends possibilities of function of central nervous system. You know, last 20 years, the obstetricians usually try to know the length of nasal bone in fetus. And there is a normal range of it in different months of pregnancy. And for example, if fetus has a smaller nasal bone, very often it has any problems with development of the brain. And if he has no nasal bone completely, very often we can find very serious anomalies of the brain. For example, anencephalia, when the spinal cord exists, but there is no any brain. It's interesting that our structures of the bones connects with the function of another systems of the organism. For example, with central nervous system. It's interesting, but it's strange, but it exists. And now let's try to distinguish each wall separately. Upper wall, first of all. We can say that upper wall separates nasal cavity from the anterior cranial fossa. And now I use this red square for demonstrating the two bones which form the upper wall of nasal cavity. They are lamina cribrosa ossis ethmoidalis, which is of yellow color, lamina cribrosa ossis ethmoidalis, and partially os frontali of green color. So, two bones form upper wall of nasal cavity. And now I use the photo from the specimen when the horizontal cutting was made more deeply, more inferiorly than plane of left picture. So we can find that n orbits were cutted and upper part of nasal cavity was cutted. So the cavity, nasal cavity, will be opened here when upper wall was removed. Then, next wall, lower wall. We already said that lower wall is the same as hard palate. So we use this picture of outer base of the skull to demonstrate that hard palate or lower wall of the nasal cavity is formed by processus palatinus ossis maxillae number 1 and number 2, lamina horizontalis ossis palatini I use this designation here, 1 and 2, for demonstration these structures. Processus palatinus maxilla and lamina horizontalis ossis palatini. This is lower wall. Now, what is it? What is it? It's medial wall. It's medial wall. We can see what bones form the medial wall. Let's try to list it. Medial wall or septum of nasal cavity formed by 6 structures. First, lamina perpendicularis ossis etmoidalis, here of pink color. Lamina perpendicularis ossis etmoidalis. Then, number 2, vomer of kind of green color. I use bold script for underline that these 2 bones is most important in medial wall. And another structures are quite small, but nevertheless they also exist and helps to form medial wall. They are number 3, crista nasalis maxilla. Number 3, crista nasalis maxilla. And number 4, crista nasalis ossis palatini. Crista nasalis ossis palatini. They are small structures, but nevertheless it helps to form the septum of nasal cavity. Number 5 is spina nasalis ossis frontalis. Here it is. Spina nasalis ossis frontalis. And number 6 is crista sphenoidalis and rostrum sphenoidalis. Here it is. Crista sphenoidalis and rostrum sphenoidalis. I don't know if there are in India such kind of toys for children as Lego. In Europe it's very popular, and Lego can connect different parts with each other, forming any constructions. And you can say that medial wall of the nasal cavity is constructed as Lego from different parts which were connected, inserted one into another. For example, vomer has 2 alae or 2 wings which are inserted into the rostrum ossis sphenoidalis. They are inserted in each other, forming this medial wall. And you can ask me why we not designated this part of septum of nasal cavity, this blue part, because nasal cavity has not only bony walls but also cartilaginous walls, and this is cartilage. It isn't bone. It's cartilage. And that's why sometimes, but very often, maybe each third and or each fourth person, for example, if you are here about 40, so 10 of us can have the septum of nasal cavity not straight in the medial plane, but is some kind flexed. So if this, it isn't seen when we look at the face of each other, but such persons can have difficulties in breathe through the nose. Sometimes it's more difficult to breathe in through nose than through the os, from the oral cavity. And it's possible to chirurgically correct this problem, and it will be better to breathe in. And now I use this picture from textbook of Sapin. For you can make a pause when you shall watch the video and try to explain each number, what is it, and then to check in is it right or not. I'd like to say that you will have electronic tests in our LMS 3 portal for control results of your studying, and we shall use this picture also. So it would be good to train yourself to recognize each number. Sure, when it is of black and white color, it's more difficult than when it's colorized. But nevertheless, it's life. And now lateral wall, most complicated wall. We can say that lateral wall separates nasal cavity from the orbit and the maxillary sinus. So that's why we shall list all the bones. Number 1 is maxilla. Maxilla is of blue color here. Then number 2, os lacrimale. It's of reddish color here. Then os ethmoidale. Number 3, it's of pink color here. And then concha nasalis inferior, number 4. It's of red color. And then lamina perpendicularis ossis palatini, number 5, of reddish color also. And then number 6, lamina medialis processus pterygoideus ossis sphenoidalis. Number 6, lamina medialis processus pterygoideus ossis sphenoidalis. So, can you answer me how much bones form lateral wall? Usually 6. But what about this bone, nasal bone? Sometimes it also considered as wall of lateral part of nasal cavity, but nevertheless, usually we consider it as anterior wall. So it's possible both this way to consider and another way. So sometimes you can find that 7 bones are bones of lateral wall. But nevertheless, more often we consider, like in this picture, that 6 bones. It's difficult to demonstrate in the specimen. More easy when we use the cutted skull in sagittal plane, like in this picture. But nevertheless, if we use non-cutted skull, we also should demonstrate it. Several bones from piriform orifice of the nasal cavity and several bones from horns, that means from anterior and posterior views. Okay. And now again, possibility to train, to test ourselves. It will be also used in the electronic tests. So there are a lot of designations here, and we should know each of it. So you can make a pause during watching video and try to teach it. And next very interesting question is nasal meatuses. Nasal meatuses. What is depicted in this picture? It's frontal section of the head. So we can find the orbit together with an eyeball section it. We can see the maxilla together with sinus maxillaris section it, and we can see oral cavity together with tongue also section it. And in nasal cavity we can find here several departments of the cavity, of the space, so which they named as meatuses. In this picture, number 1, meatus nasi superior, is impossible to demonstrate because it located more posteriorly. So we need to find it there. Another meatuses we can find in this picture. Meatus nasi medius. Meatus nasi medius. I use red arrow to demonstrate it. Meatus nasi medius. And then meatus nasi inferior. I again use the red arrow. Meatus nasi inferior. How we can explain? What is it? Meatus nasi superior, medius, inferior. We can say that it's space between corresponding concha and lateral wall of nasal cavity. So, if it is concha nasalis media, this small space between concha and lateral wall this thin space is meatus nasi medius, and this is concha nasalis inferior, and small space between it and lateral wall is meatus nasi inferior. So there are three meatuses, nasi superior, medius, and inferior, which are located between corresponding concha and lateral wall of nasal cavity. But besides these three meatuses, we can find also meatus nasi communis. What is it? Meatus nasi communis. It's the space between nasal septum and conchae nasalis. So I use another red arrow, and we can find this small space between septum nasi and conchae. So an air during breath in will pass through all these meatuses during its passing to the nasopharyngeal cavity. So they also helps warm the air in winter. No, like in winter here, I think in India it isn't important to warm an air during breath in, but if, for example, here you should breathe in on outdoor through mouth, it will be not good for trachea and bronchi. It will be possible to catch bronchitis and tracheitis. So the possibility to warm an air by mucous sheet which covers each of concha is very important in cold regions during the winter. Another picture which demonstrates the same structures. Here it is, meatus nasi medius, and here it is, meatus nasi inferior. Again, we can't demonstrate here meatus nasi superior because it's posteriorly to this section and isn't seen in this picture. And now, what is this? Third arrow is meatus nasi communis. Meatus nasi communis. And it would be good to draw this scheme. Please copy, maybe not just now, but when you shall watch the video. It was drawn several times, several years ago in the whiteboard, and now we can designate each structure here. CG, what is it? CG, crista galli. What is it? PD, what? Here it is PD. It's palatum durum. And CNS, here it is, CNS, concha nasalis superior. CNM, here it is concha nasalis medius. CNI, here it is here now, concha nasalis inferior, and we using number 1, 2, 3, 4 for demonstrated meatus nasi superior number 1, meatus nasi medius number 2, and you can see that through meatus nasi medius it's possible to enter sinus maxillaris, and number 3 meatus nasi inferior, and number 4 meatus nasi communis. So I recommend you copy this scheme for understanding on the details of meatuses of nasal cavity. But I propose you to make the copy in detail during watching video, not just now. It's more complicated during lecture. So let's continue, and then you shall finish this drawing later. And now there is a question: what opens up to meatus nasi superior? Meatus nasi superior is here. So, what opens up here? First of all, sinus sphenoidalis. You can see here sinus sphenoidalis. It will open meatus nasi superior. Number 1, sinus sphenoidalis. Then, number 2, foramen sphenopalatинum. Foramen sphenopalatинum also will be here. Foramen sphenopalatинum. And then, cellulae ethmoidalis posterioris. You can see that ethmoidal bone has a numerous cellulae inside of it, which could be divided into anterior ones, medial ones, and posterior ones. That cellulae ethmoidalis posterioris, which are close to meatus nasi superior, they are opened into meatus nasi superior. So it's important for us to remember what structures opens up into meatus nasi superior. They are 3: sinus sphenoidalis, foramen sphenopalatинum, and cellulae ethmoidalis posterioris. Then another question: meatus nasi medius, what opens up here? It's interesting. Meatus nasi medius is located here, and sinus frontalis is opened to meatus nasi medius. Sinus frontalis, number 1. Sinus maxillaris. It's interesting. Here it is, opening of sinus maxillaris. Do you see that it's very small opening? But apertura sinus maxillaris in bony skull is very large. Why? Because of mucous sheet, which covers all the bones. So the space is very narrow, and in clinical situation of hymoritis, you remember that sinus maxillaris is hymor cavity. That's why the inflammation of mucus in this region called hymoritis. And when hymoritis take place, it's necessary to make removal of the pus from it, and the otolaryngologist it make a punction. It enters syringe into this opening and try to remove pus from hymorid cavity, from maxillary sinus. And now number 3, cellulate medalis anterioris and medi. Here they are. Sinus et medalis anterioris and medi. So we can list that in meatus nasi medius are opened 3 structures: sinus frontalis, sinus maxillaris, and cellulate medalis anterioris and medi. And last question, meatus nasi inferior. What opens up here? It's concha nasalis inferior, and space between concha nasalis inferior and lateral wall is meatus nasi inferior. So inside of it, we can find is open only one structure, canalis nasolacrimalis. Canalis nasolacrimalis. That's all. So we should remember by heart how much structures opens up into each of meatuses and to demonstrate them. So I recommend you being prepared to control class concerning the skull, to find all the bones, to find all the structures in the bony specimen of the skull, and it will be good preparation for your class when you shall demonstrate your knowledge. Thank you for attention. The lecture is over.